15 doctors gave up on Billionaire, but then the maid stepped in and did the impossible. The cold, sterile air in the master suite didn't just feel expensive, it felt final. It was the kind of air purified by machines that cost more than most cars, meant to keep death's smell at bay. But death was here anyway, sitting in the plush, king-sized bed that now looked like a medical exhibit. Alistair Croft, a titan of industry, a man whose name was synonymous with power and unimaginable wealth, was being erased. His once imposing frame was now just a fragile outline beneath the stark white sheets. Wires and tubes snaked from his body to a symphony of beeping monitors, each chirp a grim reminder of the life slipping away. His son, Sebastian, stood by the window, his face a mask of anguish. He'd watched 15 of the world's top specialists cycle through this room. Each one arrived with a reputation built on miracles, their confidence as immense as their fees. And each one had left, their shoulders slumped, their diagnoses a variation of the same devastating theme: there's nothing more we can do. The 15th and final doctor, a renowned neurologist from Switzerland, closed his leather-bound chart with a soft, definitive snap. The sound echoed in the silent, cavernous room. "Sebastian," he said, his accent thick, his tone devoid of all hope. "I am sorry. We have exhausted every conceivable option. The degeneration is total. His body is shutting down. Medicine has reached its limit." He placed a hand on Sebastian's shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a verdict than a comfort. "It's time to make him comfortable. Call the hospice service." The door clicked shut behind the doctor, leaving Sebastian alone with the ghost of his father. The weight of it all crushed him. All that money. All that power. The private jets, the influence that could move markets, the fortune that could buy anything in the world. It was all utterly, completely useless. It couldn't buy a single healthy breath for the man who had built it all. A sob escaped him, a raw sound of pure helplessness, and he sank into a velvet armchair, burying his face in his hands. The monitors continued their lonely rhythmic song, the soundtrack to an ending. In the shadows of the hallway, just beyond the soft light spilling from the room, stood Eleanor. Everyone called her Ellie. For 10 years, she had moved through this vast mansion like a quiet ghost, polishing the silver, dusting the artifacts, silently witnessing the life of the Croft family. She saw the business partners who came and went, the strained dinners, the loneliness that not even the most opulent art could fill. She saw the man, not just the billionaire. She watched Sebastian's shoulders shake with grief. She looked at Mr. Croft, his face pale and waxy under the clinical lights. And something shifted in her. It wasn't pity. It was a deep, resolute recognition. She had seen this before. Not in a mansion, but in a small sun-baked house a world away. She smoothed her simple white apron and walked into the room. Her footsteps were silent on the Persian rug. Before we dive deeper into this journey, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. She stopped beside Sebastian's chair. He didn't look up, lost in his despair. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but clear, a steady calm cutting through the sterile silence. "Sir." Sebastian looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and confused. Why was the maid bothering him now? Ellie's gaze was not on him, but on the dying man in the bed. Her expression was one of not just empathy, but of unwavering certainty. "Sir," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of an unshakable truth. "I think I might be able to help. Please, just give me one night with him." The request was so absurd, so utterly out of left field, that a harsh, disbelieving laugh burst from Sebastian's lips. He stared at Ellie as if she'd just spoken in tongues. "You," he choked out, the word dripping with a mixture of scorn and bewildered grief. "Help him? Ellie, 15 of the most brilliant medical minds on the planet have failed. What on earth could you possibly do that they couldn't?" He gestured wildly at the bank of machines, the 4 drips, the silent, terrifying technology. "This isn't a stained rug or a dusty chandelier. This is my father's life." But Ellie didn't flinch. She didn't shrink back or lower her eyes. She stood her ground, her hands clasped loosely in front of her apron, her gaze steady and profound. "I am not a doctor, sir. I do not have their machines, or their education." She paused, choosing her words with a care that felt ancient. "But I have something else. I have seen this before. Not this room or these things." She gestured faintly at the medical equipment. But the stillness. The leaving. I know I cannot explain it in a way that will make sense to you. I am not asking you to believe me. I am only asking for a chance. One night. If there is no change by sunrise, you will not see me again. Her calm was unnerving. It wasn't the confidence of a charlatan. It was the deep, quiet resolve of someone who knew a fundamental truth that existed outside of textbooks and bank accounts. Sebastian's anger deflated, replaced by a crushing wave of desperation. What did he have to lose? The doctors had given up. The funeral home was the next call. This was madness, but it was a madness that offered a sliver of something he hadn't felt in weeks, a shred of hope, however insane. He ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," he whispered, the word tasting like ashes. "One night. But I'll be watching. Every second." His voice hardened. "If you do anything that seems even remotely dangerous, I will have security in here instantly. Do you understand?" Ellie simply nodded. "I understand, sir. Thank you." Her requests were baffling in their simplicity. She asked for a specific blend of herbs for a tea, common ones, chamomile and lavender, nothing exotic. She asked for raw, organic honey. For bowls of warm water and soft, clean cotton cloths. And most of all, she asked for silence. No interruptions. No questions. Sebastian arranged for the items to be brought, his skepticism warring with a desperate, fragile need to believe in the impossible. As the door to the master suite closed, sealing Ellie inside with the dying billionaire, Sebastian retreated to his father's private study next door. He switched on the bank of security monitors, one of which showed a wide-angle view of the bedroom. The audio was poor, just a faint, statusy hum. He watched, his heart a drum in his chest, as Ellie approached the bed. She didn't pull out a mysterious vial or chant strange incantations. She simply dipped a cloth in the warm water, wrung it out, and began to gently bathe Alistair's forehead, her movements slow, reverent, and infinitely tender. It was the kind of care money couldn't buy. Hours ticked by. Sebastian watched, his eyes gritty with exhaustion, as Ellie performed her quiet actions. She spoke to his father, her voice too low for the microphone to pick up anything but a soothing murmur. She massaged his hands with a gentle, rhythmic pressure. She helped him sip the herbal tea. It wasn't a medical procedure, it was an act of profound devotion. Sebastian's initial skepticism began to morph into a confused, weary fascination. He wasn't watching a miracle worker, he was watching a caregiver of impossible patience and empathy. Just as he was about to succumb to sleep, his eyes snapped open. On the grainy monitor, he could have sworn he saw it. A movement. His father's head, which had lain motionless for days, turned a fraction of an inch on the pillow, turning toward the sound of Ellie's voice. Sebastian leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat, convinced his grief and exhaustion were playing tricks on him. The first pale light of dawn was just beginning to bleed into the sky, painting the LA haze in shades of rose and gold, when Sebastian's resolve finally broke. He had spent the night in the study chair, his body stiff, his mind a chaotic swirl of hope, fear, and utter exhaustion. The grainy image on the monitor had shown nothing but Ellie's quiet, constant vigil. He'd seen no miracles, heard no divine interventions, just the soft, rhythmic motion of her care. The hope he'd felt hours ago had curdled back into a bitter certainty of impending loss. It had been a foolish, desperate gamble. He pushed himself up, his heart a lead weight, and walked to his father's door. He needed to face reality. He needed to call the funeral director. He pushed the door open slowly, the silence within feeling heavier than before. He expected to see Ellie slumped in a chair, asleep, or perhaps looking up at him with defeated eyes. He expected to hear the labored, shallow breathing that had been his father's constant dirge. The scene that greeted him was none of those things. Ellie was standing by the window, drawing open the heavy curtains just enough to let the soft morning light spill into the room. She turned as he entered, her face serene but etched with the fatigue of a long night's work. And in the bed, Sebastian's gaze shot to his father. Alistair Croft was asleep. But this was not the unconscious, death-like slumber of the previous days. This was different. His face, which had been a waxy, taut mask of pain, was relaxed. The terrifying gray pallor had been replaced by a faint, healthy pinkness that seemed to glow in the early light. Most astonishing of all, his chest rose and fell in a deep, steady, rhythmic pattern. It was the sleep of exhaustion, yes, but it was the sleep of life. The relentless, erratic beeping of the heart monitor had been replaced by a strong, consistent, and steady rhythm. Sebastian stood frozen in the doorway, his hand still on the knob, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, drawn to the bedside like a magnet. He stared at his father, then at the vitals display, then back at his father. The change was not dramatic. It was subtle, profound, and utterly impossible. How? The word was a choked whisper, torn from the depths of his soul. He turned to Ellie, his eyes wide with a confusion that bordered on awe. "What did you do? Tell me what you did." Ellie approached him, her movements calm and weary. "He is resting," she said simply, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. Truly resting. For the first time in a very long time. "But how?" Sebastian insisted, his voice trembling. "The doctors, they said it was irreversible. They said his systems were shutting down." Before Ellie could answer, a brisk knock sounded at the door. It was Dr. Evans, the primary physician from the day before, making his promised follow-up visit. He entered with a somber, prepared expression, ready to offer his final condolences and discuss next steps. His professional demeanor evaporated the second his eyes landed on the heart monitor. He stopped dead, his medical bag slipping from his hand and thumping softly on the rug. "What in God's name?" he muttered, rushing to the bedside. He checked Alistair's pulse manually, his fingers pressing against the wrist, his eyes darting to the monitor and then to the patient's peaceful face. He shone a light into his eyes, checked his reflexes. The clinical confusion on his face was absolute. This is not possible. His vitals are stabilized. His cardiac rhythm is sinus. It's strong. He whirled around, his gaze landing not on Sebastian, but on Ellie. His eyes narrowed, not in awe, but in sudden sharp suspicion. "What did you administer to him?" he demanded, his voice low and accusatory. "Was it an unregulated stimulant? Some kind of folk poison that creates a false surge? You may have killed him with your ignorance." The air, which had moments before been filled with the warmth of a miracle, instantly turned cold and hostile. The doctor's accusation hung in the air, a toxic cloud in the once peaceful room. Sebastian instinctively moved a half-step closer to Ellie, a protective gesture that surprised even him. The raw medical shock on Dr. Evans's face was being rapidly overwritten by a narrative he could understand. Not a miracle, but malpractice. Ellie, however, remained a pillar of unshakable calm. She met the doctor's furious gaze not with defiance, but with a deep, weary patience. "I have given him nothing that was not already in this house, doctor," she said, her voice even. "Nothing that was not pure. Warm water, herbs for tea, honey, and my hands." She held up her hands, capable and strong, yet gentle. "There are no secrets in what I used. Only in how I used them." Preposterous. Dr. Evans spat, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. He turned back to his patient, rechecking the readings, searching for a clue, a trick, anything to explain the data that defied all his textbooks. The body does not simply reverse total multi-system failure because of a sponge bath and bedtime story. Sebastian watched this exchange, the doctor's clinical anger clashing with Ellie's profound serenity. He saw the truth in her words. He had watched her all night on the monitor. There were no syringes, no mysterious powders. There was only meticulous, relentless care. A thought, fragile but persistent, began to form in his mind. What if the problem wasn't the medicine, but the diagnosis itself? "Doctor," Sebastian said, his voice firmer now. "Just stop. Look at him." He pointed to his father's face, peaceful in repose. "Does he look like a man who has been poisoned? Does he look like he's in distress? For weeks, he's been fighting something invisible, writhing in pain even in his coma. Now he's just sleeping. Really sleeping. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not what did she give him, but what did she take away?" The room fell silent, save for the strong, steady beep of the heart monitor. Dr. Evans opened his mouth to retort, but found no words. He just stared at Alistair Croft, a living, breathing medical anomaly. It was then that Ellie moved. She walked not to the doctor, but to Sebastian. "The night is over, sir," she said softly. "But my work is not. What he needs now is not more watching. It is more listening. She paused, gathering her thoughts. There is a box. A wooden crate, I think. It came from his old office downtown years ago. It was put in the storage room in the West Wing. I believe it has things in it that he would want to see. Photographs. Letters. Things that matter. Sebastian was baffled. My father? Sentimental items? You must be mistaken. He was never one for looking back. A sad, knowing smile touched Ellie's lips. Oh, sir, she whispered. It is all he does. He just does it in the quiet, where no one can see. Her certainty was absolute. She had not just cleaned his home, she had borne witness to his solitary life. She had seen the way his fingers would occasionally trace the edge of an old picture frame before he noticed her and quickly composed himself. Driven by a compulsion he didn't understand, Sebastian left the room. He went to the distant, dusty storage room, a place not even the regular staff fully cleaned. And there, behind an old armoire, he found it. A simple, unassuming wooden crate, its lid nailed shut years ago, a thin layer of dust testifying to its long neglect. He pried the lid open. Inside, nestled in yellowed newspaper, was not the business ledgers or financial reports he expected. It was a treasure trove of a forgotten life. Black and white photographs of a young Alistair with a woman who was unmistakably Sebastian's mother, laughing on a beach. A bundle of love letters tied with a faded ribbon. And at the very bottom, a small worn wooden toy, a hand-carved train engine. Sebastian carried the box back as if it were made of glass. He entered the bedroom just as the morning sun fully illuminated the room. Dr. Evans was still there, silently taking notes, a humbled and bewildered man. Ellie was sitting in a chair she had pulled close to the bedside, her presence a quiet anchor. Sebastian placed the open crate on a nearby table. Ellie didn't look at the contents. She simply nodded, as if she had known exactly what was inside all along. She reached into the box, her movements reverent, and pulled out the photograph of his parents. She held it where Alistair's eyes, had they been open, could have seen it. And then she began to speak, her voice a low melodic murmur, telling the story of the day that picture was taken, a story Sebastian himself had never heard, a story of a young man full of hope and love, long before he became a billionaire. And as she spoke, a single perfect tear welled up in the corner of Alistair Croft's closed eye, tracing a slow glistening path down his temple and into his pillow. The single tear was a seismic event. It was a crack in the impenetrable fortress of Alistair Croft's illness, a silent message from a man everyone had given up for lost. Dr. Evans stared, his medical arrogance completely shattered, his pen frozen above his notepad. He looked from the tear to Ellie, and for the first time, his gaze held not suspicion, but a dawning humbled respect for a phenomenon he could not quantify. Without another word, he gave a slow, solemn nod to Sebastian and quietly left the room, closing the door softly behind him, conceding the battlefield to a wisdom he could not comprehend. Sebastian fell to his knees beside the bed, his own tears flowing freely now. He wasn't a billionaire's son in that moment, he was just a boy, watching his father come back to him. He reached out and gently took his father's hand, feeling a warmth that had been absent for months. He can hear you, Sebastian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He's really in there. Ellie nodded, her eyes soft. He has always been in there, sir. He was just, very far away. And very tired. She continued her work, but now it was different. Sebastian was not an observer, he was a participant. At her gentle direction, he was the one to hold the photograph. He was the one to read a line from one of the old love-worn letters, his voice cracking as he recognized his mother's youthful handwriting. Ellie guided him, not as a maid instructing her employer, but as a wise elder teaching a profound lesson. Tell him about the train, she prompted softly, her gaze on the small carved wooden engine. And so Sebastian did. He spoke of a memory, long buried, of a Christmas morning when he was 5. His father, young and not yet bowed by the weight of his fortune, had gotten down on the carpet with him, and they had built an elaborate track for that very train. They had spent hours there, not a billionaire and his heir, but just a father and his son, lost in a simple joyful world of their own making. Sebastian had forgotten that man even existed. As he spoke, something miraculous continued to happen. Alistair's breathing grew even deeper. The faint, almost imperceptible grip of his fingers around Sebastian's hand seemed to tighten. The terrible waxy stillness that had defined him was receding, replaced by the subtle, living energy of a man re-engaging with the world. Ellie's methods were a mystery, but their effect was undeniable. She wasn't fighting the illness with chemicals. She was coaxing the man back to life with memories, with touch, with the unassailable proof that his life had meant something beyond boardrooms and bank balances. The day passed in a blur of quiet activity. Nurses came and went under Dr. Evans's new deferential instructions, but the real healing happened in the space between Ellie's murmured stories and Sebastian's rediscovered memories. They weren't just treating a patient, they were reassembling a soul. As evening drew its curtains once more, the room felt transformed. It was no longer a sterile hospice room. It felt lived in, warm, hopeful. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the soft sounds of life and the low hum of conversation. Sebastian felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. He looked at Ellie, this quiet, unassuming woman who held secrets deeper than any medical degree could confer. He had to know. The question that had been burning in him all day finally found its voice. "Ellie," he began, his voice filled with a reverence that had nothing to do with social status. "How did you know? How did you know any of this would work? How did you know about the box, about the train?" He gestured around the room, at the man in the bed who was no longer dying, but healing. All of this. It's impossible. He needed to understand the source of this miracle, the truth behind the woman who had done the impossible. The room was quiet, holding its breath. Sebastian's question hung between them, vast and profound. Ellie looked from his earnest, tear-streaked face to the man in the bed, whose every steady breath was a testament to her impossible actions. She smoothed her apron, a simple, habitual gesture that grounded her. "It is not so impossible, sir," she began, her voice a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate with an old, deep wisdom. "It is just a different kind of knowing. The doctors, they are brilliant men. They know the body like a master knows a complex machine. They can name every part, every wire, every chemical. And that is a powerful gift." She paused, her gaze turning inward. But they did not know him. She gestured gently toward Alistair. They saw a failing heart, a struggling liver, a confused mind. A list of broken parts to be fixed. "But I have spent 10 years in the shadows of this life. I have seen the man when he thought no one was looking. I have seen him stare at that same photograph for an hour, his shoulders heavy with a grief he never speaks. I have heard him sigh over financial reports, not with triumph, but with a tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep. I have seen the light in his eyes dim, year by year, as his money built higher walls and his fortune created a deeper loneliness." She took a slow breath. "The body does not exist separate from the spirit, sir. It speaks what the soul cannot." His soul was sick with regret. Sick with loneliness. Sick with the weight of every dream he set aside to build this. She gestured around the magnificent sterile room, this beautiful prison. His body was not failing, it was following. It was giving up because his spirit had already begun to. She looked Sebastian directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering and clear. "I did not cure a disease. I simply reminded him. I reminded him of the man he was before the world called him a billionaire. I reminded him that he was loved. That he is loved. I used the herbs not as medicine, but as a comfort, a familiar scent from a simpler time. I used my hands not to perform a procedure, but to connect, to say, 'You are not alone in this room.' I spoke of his past not to distract him, but to show him that his life was not just a ledger of profits and losses. It was a story. And a story must have an ending, but it did not have to be this one. Not here. Not now. Not filled with such sorrow." Her explanation was devastating in its simplicity. It wasn't magic. It was something far more powerful, profound empathy. She had seen the root of the sickness where million-dollar machines could not look. She had diagnosed a broken heart in the most literal sense. As her last words faded, a new sound entered the room. A soft, rasping inhalation, different from the rhythmic breathing of sleep. Sebastian's head snapped toward the bed. Alistair Croft's eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. They slowly, heavily, opened. His eyes were clouded with confusion, bleary from the long, deep journey he had taken. They drifted around the room, unseeing at first, then slowly focusing. They passed over the familiar ceiling, the expensive artwork, and then landed on his son, kneeling by his bedside, holding his hand. A flicker of recognition. Then those pale, weary eyes moved to Ellie, standing there in her simple white apron, her work done. His lips were dry and cracked. He worked them for a moment, no sound coming out. The effort was immense. Sebastian leaned in closer, his heart hammering against his ribs, afraid to even breathe. Alistair's gaze was locked on Ellie, on the woman who had pulled him back from the abyss not with science, but with soul. He drew another shallow breath, and a single whispered word escaped on the exhale, a word that held the weight of a miracle, a word that answered every question and justified every doubt. You. The word hung in the air, a fragile, miraculous thread connecting a billionaire to the woman who saved him. It wasn't just recognition, it was gratitude, profound and absolute. A peace settled over Alistair's features that no medication had ever been able to achieve. The long, terrifying journey was over. He was home. In the weeks that followed, the mansion transformed. The cold, clinical machines were wheeled away, replaced by the warm, lived-in clutter of a life being rediscovered. Alistair's recovery was slow but steady, guided by a new team of doctors who now worked under Ellie's quiet, respectful direction. She became the architect of his healing, her wisdom the blueprint they all followed. One afternoon, Alistair, sitting in a chair by the window for the first time, asked Sebastian and Ellie to join him. The sun warmed the room. He looked at Ellie, his voice still weak, but his mind crystal clear. This second chance, he began, his eyes glistening. It is not a thing to be wasted on old regrets. It is a gift to build something new. He reached out, placing his frail hand over hers. You saw the sickness that no scanner could find. You treated a wound that no amount of money could ever heal. That is the real fortune. Not what I have, but what you gave. He didn't offer her a bonus or a raise. He offered her a partnership. He announced his intention to use his vast wealth to establish the Eleanor Vance Foundation, a network of community-based care centers. They wouldn't be hospitals, but sanctuaries. Places that treated the whole person, their stories, their grief, their loneliness, with the same compassion Ellie had shown him. She would be its heart and its director, her methods taught not as alternative medicine, but as essential human care. The story of Alistair Croft's miracle spread, but the true lesson was quieter, deeper. It wasn't about a maid who knew secret healing arts. It was about the invisible power of seeing someone, truly seeing them. It was about the wealth of compassion that exists in the most humble of places, and the profound truth that sometimes, the most impossible thing to find is not a cure, but a simple human connection. And in the end, that connection is the greatest riches of all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, share this video and tell us in the comments, what part of this journey moved you the most? There's another story waiting for you, and it might just change the way you see the world. Thank you so much for watching and see you soon.